So what's the idea behind ChatGPT's code interpreter feature? Well, one very important use case for using ChatGPT, which we'll also explore in this course, is to use ChatGPT to generate code, because ChatGPT is capable of generating code for a vast variety of programming languages. But without Code Interpreter, you then have to take that generated code and execute it on your own, which often also means that you need to install or set up extra tools that might be required to execute that code. With Code Interpreter, ChatGPT is not just able to generate the code, but it's also able to execute that code. It's able to execute those generated code snippets in an isolated, restricted execution environment. And therefore, certain restrictions, to which I will come back, will apply, and at this point of time, it's also just Python code that can be executed. Nonetheless, this is of course an extremely useful feature that can be used for a broad variety of use cases. You could use this feature to perform mathematical calculations, and you would no longer face the danger of running into hallucinations, since with Code Interpreter, ChatGPT is now able to simply write the code that will then perform the mathematical calculation, instead of trying to predict the result, which can sometimes be wrong. You could also use Code Interpreter to generate dummy data or extract information from files or transform file content. You can use it for data science to load and clean data, and of course to analyze data and build charts. And you can also use it for image editing, for example to analyze and transform images or do other exciting things with images. And there might be more use cases where you want to use Code Interpreter, because even though these here are probably the most important and common use cases, as with ChatGPT in general, it's of course ultimately your imagination that's the limit. Though speaking of limits, Code Interpreter definitely has some limits, because the code that gets generated and executed by ChatGPT is executed in an isolated execution environment provided by OpenAI. So that code that's generated and executed is executed on machines owned and operated by OpenAI. And therefore, certain restrictions set by OpenAI do apply. For example, at the moment, OpenAI only provides an execution environment for Python code. So you can't execute other code with Code Interpreter at this point of time, though that of course may change over time. In addition, the code that is being executed in that environment does not have internet access. So if you're trying to run some code that would need to reach out to the internet, for example to crawl and summarize a website, that code would fail and would not work. In addition, this environment of course also has no access to your local hard drive, because, as I just mentioned, that code's running on some machine owned and operated by OpenAI. It's not running on your system, and it therefore doesn't have access to your system. Which, of course, in general is a good thing, but if you're trying to run some code that needs to work with data that's stored on your machine, that code also would fail, though ChatGPT actually does allow you to also upload and download files when using Code Interpreter. Though of course you should definitely take a look at OpenAI's privacy policy to understand how they might be using or storing the data you're sharing with them, for example through file uploads, because you might not want to share super sensitive internal company data. For example, at least you should be aware of how OpenAI is going to use that data. Now, in addition, in that execution environment, there's only a selected list of extra code packages available. And with that, I mean extra packages that contain some extra code that could be used to execute your code. For example, there are packages that help with image manipulation or with QR code generation. And whilst this environment that's provided by OpenAI comes with many pre-installed utility packages that might be needed to run the code you need to run for a given task, there also might be certain tasks you might want to perform with help of Code Interpreter that just won't work because a certain package that might be needed might be missing. Though in our experience, Code Interpreter and ChatGPT are doing quite well when it comes to identifying such situations and are then often able to generate and execute some alternative code that does not require a certain package that might be missing. Last but not least, another important Code Interpreter restriction is that it's only available for ChatGPT Plus users and not in the free version.